So, what are unconscious biases? How do they differ from systemic biases? And why should we actually care? My name is Leesa Renee Hall, and I help highly sensitive people and deep feelers explore unconscious biases so that they stand on the side of justice and become better ancestors, all while protecting their energy. So if you do a search of unconscious biases, you'll find lots and lots and lots and lots of websites and search results. Some saying that there are three types of unconscious biases, 200 types of unconscious biases. There are people who will say that systemic racism isn't real, or systemic biases, or systemic poverty. And so it can get really confusing trying to wrap your head around what an unconscious bias is and whether or not you should be concerned. And so I've got my notes here because I want to make sure I get this right. This is probably the 5th time I'm trying to record this. And so I said, you know what? We're not going to do this again. Instead, we're going to make sure we have our notes. And so let's take a look at what unconscious biases are. And I'm going to give you a very simple definition. An unconscious bias is a hidden, invisible, unseen stereotype or prejudice held by individuals. That's it. That's all it is in its simplicity. And someone will hear that and say, no, I don't have unconscious biases. Not me. But we all do. We all do. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. Our unconscious biases are formed through 3 specific things. Through cultural conditioning, so how we were raised in our society. The second thing that influences our unconscious biases and how they form is family programming. So the messages you heard while growing up that were shared by your family members. And then the third thing that helps to shape unconscious biases is our lived experiences. So the things that we go through throughout life can help to create unconscious biases. If you are human, then those 3 things are true for you, which means you have unconscious biases. And so when we look at unconscious biases, we can hold them towards people. So some of us will hold an unconscious bias towards someone depending on their social, ethnic, or biological identities. We can hold unconscious biases towards places, maybe certain neighborhoods, certain countries. We can also hold unconscious biases towards certain fruits and vegetables and foods that we eat. For example, I was really not in love with bananas. Like, just the smell kind of made me go. And so I dug deep and asked myself, well, why? And when I started to look back, I remember a very specific childhood memory where mashed potatoes were used as a prop in a haunted house. And I was blindfolded. And when we were taken through this haunted house, this is when I was a child, and it happened at elementary school. And they had this big haunted house thing portable that they converted into a haunted house. And so blindfolded, I was led through, and we came to some bowls that were filled with stuff. So the first bowl, my hand was dipped in, and it was water with things floating in it. And someone who was leading me through said, ew, those are eyeballs. And then the second bowl was a bowl filled with mashed up bananas. And so my hands were dipped in, and the person said, ew, those are brains. And that memory stuck with me, declaring that my fingers were being dipped in brains, mushy brains, and the smell of the bananas, and that connection stayed with me for a very long time. Let's just say I like banana bread now. And I don't mind a banana in my protein shake. Yeah, so I've kind of gotten over it now that I've identified the source of that unconscious bias. So again, we all have unconscious biases, nothing to be ashamed of. But what is continuing to deny that it even exists. And so as we look at unconscious biases, the next question is this: how does unconscious biases differ from systemic biases? All right, check this out. If unconscious biases are hidden prejudices and stereotypes held by individuals, Systemic biases are stereotypes and prejudices held by institutions. And that's the difference. When I'm in my workshop rooms with attendees, the question I'll ask is, okay, what are institutions? What represents an institution? And some of the answers that come back is education. The education system is an institution. Real estate, churches and religion, that's another institution. Politics, medicine, law enforcement, the judicial system, we can keep going on and on. And in fact, I'd ask you, what are some institutions that I missed that can be considered under this list? And so, because institutions are made up of individuals, those individuals bring their unconscious biases into these institutions, and then the institutions will create, you follow me? They'll create bills, they'll create laws, they'll create policies that are guided by the individual's unconscious bias. Because I don't know about you, I mean, when I go into a bank, I don't see androids working there. You know, I'm all about Star Trek, love data, but here's what I know. There are no androids working in institutions. Institutions are made up of individuals. And as a result, this is the reason why systemic biases are real. Because if it's individuals working in banks, if it's individuals teaching in school, so, what's wrong with me? If it's nurses that are individuals working in hospitals, doctors, if it's individuals that are working as police officers, then they're going to bring their unconscious biases to their work. This is real. This is what's given. This is the reality. And so we can't deny that that is true. And as I shared, we all have unconscious biases. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be embarrassed by. And so one of the other questions that pops up is, why should I even care? Why should I even care that unconscious biases are real? Why should I even care about systemic biases? And it's because these biases guide our decisions. And so when we are operating from a place where we don't even know that these hidden stereotypes and prejudices are influencing our decisions, it means that some gain an unfair advantage as a result. And then others do not gain any advantages. That if we have an even playing field, then it would mean that people will gain and lose things no matter their social, ethnic, or biological identities. But sadly, that's not the case. Sadly, what we're seeing is that depending on the body you're born in will depend on what you will gain and lose in the culture that you're raised in. See, one of the examples that I can share with you is I used to be a basketball referee, and I was also a basketball player, not at the same time. You can't do that at the same time. But I was a basketball player first, and then after I stopped playing the game as a competitor, I started to officiate the game as a referee. And as a referee on the court, having the knowledge as a player is both beneficial and not. It helps me as a player, as a referee and a former player, it helps me to understand the game a little bit better. However, I do bring some of my unconscious biases through, and they may not be known to me. Like, for example, if I played a small forward on every basketball team I was on, and therefore I may have some unconscious biases around the small forward position. I may watch that position more as a referee because that's the position I played, not really perhaps paying attention to the point guard or the center. And then the reason why this becomes a problem is because then every referee will start refereeing the game differently, confusing the players, confusing the coaches, and making for an unsafe environment. Hence the reason why referees go through training every week, every month, to ensure that they're interpreting the rules of the game consistently across the board. So again, it evens out the playing field. Everyone feels like they have a fair shot and a fair chance, and that makes for a happier society. And so lastly, this is what I want to cover, because and then we can always follow it up with any other questions you have. But here's a question I often get. How do I know I even have unconscious biases? If they're unconscious and they're unseen, how do I know I even have them? Often the clue is when there's a conflict between what you believe and how you behave. That you think one way, but then your actions show something else. Often this comes up when someone says, well, I don't see race, I see the human race. But yeah, if they're on the street and they pass a group of young black men, they immediately clutch their purse. Someone might say, well, I don't see color. I don't see color. I don't see color at all. And yet they act in a way where they are suspicious of someone with brown or black skin. Of course, those are just a couple of examples. There are much, much, much more. But my point here is that if you become conscious of the way you act, and if it conflicts with your belief system, that if you truly believe we're all of the human race, and you act in a way where you're suspicious of certain people because of the way they dress, because of the way they look, then that's a conflict, and it means there's an unconscious bias that you have to explore. In a video that I did recently, I talked about one of my favorite tools in helping to unpack unconscious biases. You can listen to that, but very quickly, one of the ways that you can unpack your unconscious biases is to use journaling. And what I've done is I've created guided prompts that people in my community on Patreon use, and using stream of consciousness writing, they write uninterrupted, uncensored, and unfiltered for at least 20 minutes. And then afterwards, they're able to assess what came up. They share that in my community on Patreon, and are able to have an understanding as to how they've become now more conscious of their unconscious biases. See, at the end of the day, we can't fight our unconscious biases, we can't conquer them, we can't defeat them, we can't eliminate them, because there is still a culture out there that is raising us according to certain standards. And so the point here is not to try to fight, eliminate, conquer your unconscious biases. Instead, the goal is to make your make your unconscious biases conscious. I can't even say the word. Conscious. To make your unconscious biases conscious. I got it, right? And that way you're able to understand what are the situations that trigger that unconscious bias, and so that you can operate in a different way, in a way that is truly equitable, in a way that's truly anti-oppressive, and in a way that's truly anti-bias. Stumble bravely.